Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in the history of Georgia. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing how far and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1846, when the Prescott family name was etched into the dark corners of Augusta's history. Not through glory or achievement, but through whispers that would eventually grow loud enough to echo across generations. The Prescott plantation stood proudly along the Savannah River, its white columns gleaming in the Georgian sun, while its shadows held secrets that would eventually seep into the soil itself. Frederick Prescott was known throughout the region as a businessman of impeccable standing. His cotton plantation, Willow Creek, stretched over 800 acres of the most fertile land in Richmond County. The harvests were bountiful, the profits substantial, and his position in society unassailable. His wife, Eleanor, maintained the household with quiet efficiency, hosting the seasonal gatherings expected of their station. According to the Augusta Chronicle's Society pages from March 18, 1846, Amelia Prescott was a vision of Southern grace, possessed of a quick mind and gentle demeanor that has made her the object of admiration throughout Richmond County. What the papers failed to mention was how Amelia's eyes seemed to hold something different from the practiced gentility of her contemporaries. A certain watchfulness, an awareness that made some guests at Willow Creek uncomfortable in ways they couldn't quite articulate. They had 3 children: Thomas, the heir apparent, Catherine, who had married into the prominent Reynolds family, and Amelia, their youngest, at 22 years of age. The first indication that something was amiss at Willow Creek came in the early spring of 1846. A routine inventory of the plantation's assets, conducted every quarter as was Frederick Prescott's meticulous custom, revealed discrepancies that could not be explained away by normal loss or accounting errors. Items were disappearing, not valuable silver or jewelry that might tempt a thief, but strange, specific things. Medical supplies from Eleanor's cabinet, preserved food from the winter stores, a particular set of maps that detailed the waterways north of Augusta. Frederick dismissed the initial reports. In a letter to his business partner dated April 2nd, he wrote, "Mere oversight in the counting. Eleanor has never kept proper track of her household items, despite my continued insistence." The letter, preserved in the Augusta Historical Society's collection, reveals the neat, controlled handwriting of a man who believed disorder could always be corrected through proper management. By May, the disappearances had become impossible to ignore. Frederick hired additional overseers to patrol the property at night. The atmosphere at Willow Creek changed, as documented in the diary of Catherine Prescott Reynolds, who visited her family home during this period. "Mother seems unwell, jumping at the slightest sound. Father spends his evenings in the study, doors locked, voices occasionally rising from within when Mr. Hamilton calls. Amelia alone remains unchanged, serene, even cheerful, which in these circumstances strikes me as peculiar." The diary entry from May 23rd makes particular note of an incident at dinner. Thomas questioned Amelia about her afternoon rides, suggesting she had ventured beyond the boundaries father has set. She merely smiled and remarked on the pleasant weather we've been granted. Thomas persisted until father silenced him with a look. The rest of the meal passed in uncomfortable silence. On the morning of June 18th, 1846, Amelia Prescott's bedroom was found empty. The bed had been slept in, but showed signs of careful preparation, as if someone had attempted to make it appear recently used. A small valise was missing, along with some of her simpler dresses. No jewelry was taken. The window remained locked from the inside. The door showed no signs of forced entry. Frederick Prescott reported his daughter's disappearance to the authorities, though according to Sheriff William Tanner's records, he waited almost 48 hours before doing so. Mr. Prescott explained the delay as an attempt to avoid unnecessary scandal, wrote Tanner in his official report. He expressed confidence that his daughter had merely taken an unannounced trip to visit friends and would return shortly. The sheriff's investigation revealed that none of Amelia's friends had seen or expected her. No stagecoach or riverboat captain recalled taking on a young woman matching her description. It was as if Amelia Prescott had simply vanished from Augusta, leaving behind only questions and the strange calm of her mother, who, according to a housemaid's later testimony, took to her bed for a single day, then resumed her duties as if nothing of consequence had occurred. 3 days after Amelia's disappearance, a fire broke out in Frederick Prescott's study. The blaze was contained before it could spread to the rest of the house, but not before it consumed most of the papers stored there. Frederick claimed it started from an unattended candle, though the housekeeper insisted no candles had been lit that evening due to the full moon, providing ample light through the windows. What survived the fire were fragments of correspondence between Frederick and various associates throughout the South. One partially burned letter dated 2 weeks before Amelia's disappearance read, "Cannot afford such disruptions to continue. The risk extends beyond mere financial loss. Hamilton suggests more stringent measures, which I have until now resisted." Perhaps he is right. As summer progressed, the search for Amelia Prescott became less urgent. Sheriff Tanner's reports indicate that by July, the investigation had effectively ceased. Frederick Prescott made no public appeals for information regarding his daughter's whereabouts, which several Augusta residents found peculiar enough to comment on in their private correspondences. Amelia Prescott began to decline in health. The family physician, Dr. James Morrison, noted in his records that she suffered from nervous exhaustion and melancholia, likely precipitated by recent domestic troubles. He prescribed bed rest and laudanum, a common treatment at the time. What Dr. Morrison didn't record, but later confided to his own journal, was his impression that Amelia Prescott seemed more afraid than grieving. In August, Thomas Prescott returned to Harvard, where he was studying law. Before leaving, he conducted his own quiet inquiries about his sister's disappearance. According to Jeremiah, a house slave at Willow Creek who was interviewed decades later as part of the Federal Writers Project, young Master Thomas went through Miss Amelia's things when the master was away in town. He found something in a book that made his face go white. He took the book with him when he left for school. The book was never identified. Thomas never returned to Willow Creek. His subsequent letters to his father, preserved in the Prescott family archives, are formal and devoid of personal matters. He completed his law studies, established a practice in Boston, and appears to have severed all but the most necessary ties with his family in Georgia. In September, an unusual incident occurred that might have gone unnoticed, if not for its documentation in multiple sources. A young woman was detained in Savannah, approximately 120 miles from Augusta, on suspicion of helping a slave escape. Witnesses described her as well-spoken and educated, dressed in clothes too fine to belong to a commoner, but too plain for a lady of quality. When questioned, she gave her name as Mary Smith and claimed to be a widow traveling to meet family in Philadelphia. The Savannah magistrate's records show that no charges were filed, as no evidence could be produced. The suspicious slave was never found. The case might have remained a minor footnote in judicial records, if not for a letter sent from the magistrate to Sheriff Tanner in Augusta. The young woman detained matches somewhat the description of your missing Prescott girl. Might be worth your investigation. Sheriff Tanner reported the lead to Frederick Prescott, who dismissed it immediately. According to Tanner's notes, Mr. Prescott became agitated at the suggestion, stating his daughter would never lower herself to associate with such criminal elements. He forbade me from pursuing the matter further, claiming it would only serve to besmirch the family name with false associations. By October, life at Willow Creek appeared to have returned to its regular rhythms. Frederick Prescott expanded his business dealings, purchasing additional land and investing in a textile mill in Augusta. Eleanor remained reclusive, seldom leaving the plantation. Catherine visited only once during this period, staying for just 2 days before returning to her husband's estate. What happened next is documented in the journal of Reverend Samuel Pierce, who served as the Prescott family's pastor. Called to Willow Creek on a matter Mr. Prescott described as urgent, upon arrival, was escorted to his study where he inquired in most distressed tones about the church's position on disowning a child. I advised that while the prodigal son was ultimately welcomed home, the father's authority remained absolute in matters of family governance. This appeared to comfort him somewhat. In November, Frederick Prescott publicly announced that his daughter Amelia had chosen to remove herself from the family circle through actions unbecoming a Prescott. No details were provided. Amelia was officially disinherited, her name struck from the family Bible, an act of significant symbolic importance in Southern society of that era. The winter of 1846 brought heavy rains to Augusta. The Savannah River swelled, threatening low-lying plantations. Willow Creek, situated on higher ground, was spared the worst of the flooding, but the constant moisture took its toll on the grand house. Servants reported strange sounds in the walls, likely water damage and settling foundations, but in the tense atmosphere, these ordinary occurrences took on ominous significance. On December 12th, a letter arrived at Willow Creek with no return address. The contents were never publicly disclosed, but according to Jeremiah's later account, Miss Eleanor read whatever was in that envelope and let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, more like something breaking inside her. She burned the paper in the fireplace before anyone could see it, then locked herself in her room for 3 days. When Eleanor emerged, she was changed. Household staff reported that she began checking the locks on doors and windows multiple times each day. She refused to eat anything she hadn't personally prepared. She dismissed her lady's maid of 15 years without explanation. The new year brought no relief to the strained atmosphere at Willow Creek. Frederick Prescott's business associates noted his increasingly erratic behavior, moments of aggressive expansion followed by periods of paralyzing indecision. In a letter to his banker dated February 3, 1847, he wrote, "One cannot be too cautious in these uncertain times. The foundations we believe most solid may prove treacherous." In March, almost a year after the first noted discrepancies in the plantation's inventory, similar unexplained losses began to occur again. Medical supplies, food, clothing, small amounts, easily overlooked individually, but forming a pattern when viewed collectively. Frederick's response was swift and severe. 3 house slaves were publicly whipped on suspicion of theft, though no evidence was presented against them. According to court records from April 1847, Frederick Prescott purchased 6 trained hunting dogs from a breeder in North Carolina. The animals were deployed around the perimeter of Willow Creek plantation. Frederick informed his neighbors that the measure was necessary due to increased reports of runaway slaves and vagrants in the area, though county records show no such increase. On the night of April 17th, the dogs began barking furiously near the old carriage house. Frederick and 2 overseers investigated but found nothing. The dogs continued to bark at seemingly empty shadows until one overseer struck them into silence. The next morning, footprints were discovered leading from the carriage house to the main house, but the ground was too dry to yield clear impressions. Eleanor Prescott's health deteriorated rapidly during this period. Dr. Morrison's records indicate multiple visits to treat severe agitation, insomnia, and episodes of incoherent speech. During one such episode, according to the kitchen maid's later testimony to the Augusta Historical Society, Eleanor clutched the maid's wrist and whispered, "She watches us from the shadows. She knows what we did." On May 2nd, 1847, Amelia Prescott was found dead in her bed. The official cause was listed as heart failure brought on by nervous decline, a common diagnosis for women of her class and era. Dr. Morrison signed the death certificate without performing a detailed examination. Eleanor was buried in the Prescott family plot within 48 hours of her death, unusually quick, even by the standards of the time and climate. Frederick Prescott wore his mourning clothes for the prescribed period, attended church regularly, and maintained all outward appearances of a grieving widower. Privately, according to his valet's later account, he doubled the guard around Willow Creek and began sleeping with a loaded pistol beside his bed. In June, a strange document appeared in the possession of Arthur Hamilton, Frederick Prescott's business partner and closest confidant. It was allegedly a letter from Amelia Prescott. Though its authenticity was never verified, the contents, partially preserved in Hamilton's personal papers, included the following passage: "What was done in darkness will be brought to light. The foundations of Willow Creek are built on lies that can no longer support its weight. Father knows this. Ask him about the cellar beneath the east wing, the one that appears on no household plans." Hamilton confronted Frederick with the letter. No record exists of their conversation, but servants reported hearing raised voices from the study, followed by the sound of breaking glass. Hamilton left Willow Creek that evening and severed all business ties with Frederick Prescott the following day. When questioned by mutual acquaintances, he would say only that some partnerships cannot survive certain revelations. Throughout the summer of 1847, Frederick Prescott's behavior grew increasingly paranoid. He fired long-standing employees without explanation, changed the locks on the house multiple times, and according to his new valet, rarely slept more than 2 hours at a stretch. The once immaculate grounds of Willow Creek fell into disrepair as Frederick redirected workers to construct additional fencing and guard posts. In August, an anonymous tip led Sheriff Tanner to investigate reports of unusual construction at Willow Creek. His official record states, "Mr. Prescott explained that recent structural issues necessitated reinforcement of the East Wing foundation. Workers confirmed they had been adding additional support to an old cellar area. Nothing suspicious was observed." What the official record doesn't mention, but was later revealed in Tanner's private correspondence, was that the sheriff noted the cellar showed signs of recent habitation: a cot, food scraps, and a chamber pot. When questioned, Frederick claimed these were left by workers taking shelter during a recent thunderstorm. On September 25, 1847, Frederick Prescott attended a business meeting in Augusta. He never returned to Willow Creek. His horse arrived at the plantation gates without its rider. A search party found Frederick's body the next morning in a shallow tributary of the Savannah River, approximately 3 miles from his home. The official cause of death was drowning, possibly after being thrown from his horse while crossing the stream. No investigation into Frederick Prescott's death was conducted. The coroner's report noted bruising on his body, consistent with a fall from horseback. He was buried beside his wife in the family plot, with Reverend Pierce officiating a sparsely attended funeral. Thomas Prescott returned briefly from Boston to settle his father's estate. According to probate records, he sold Willow Creek Plantation to a merchant from Charleston for significantly less than its market value, with the unusual stipulation that the main house be demolished within 6 months of purchase. During the demolition, workers discovered a sealed room in the East Wing cellar, a space roughly 8 feet square, with walls of unusually thick construction. Inside, they found a collection of items: women's clothing, a journal written in a cipher that was never decoded, and a locket containing a miniature portrait of a young black woman. The discovery was noted in the contractor's records, but does not appear to have been reported to authorities. The land where Willow Creek once stood was divided and sold to multiple owners over subsequent decades. The original plantation house site remained unoccupied, with local rumors claiming the ground there was sour and would not support new construction. In 1862, during the Civil War, a Union scouting party reported finding a woman living alone in a small cabin near the former Willow Creek plantation. According to the lieutenant's field notes, she claimed to be a daughter of this land, returned to reclaim what was taken. When the scouting party returned the following day, the cabin was empty and showed signs of having been abandoned for years. After the war, as part of the Freedmen's Bureau documentation project, interviews were conducted with former slaves from plantations throughout Richmond County. 3 separate accounts from individuals formerly owned by the Prescott family made reference to Miss Amelia's secret, though none would elaborate further, even decades after emancipation. In 1868, a professor of history at the newly established Augusta College received a package containing various documents related to the Prescott family. The sender identified herself only as a witness to truth. The collection included fragments of Amelia Prescott's private correspondence, several pages apparently torn from Frederick's business ledgers, and most significantly, a diary allegedly belonging to Amelia Prescott. The diary, if authentic, revealed that Amelia had discovered her father was secretly selling free black people into slavery, kidnapping or luring them from northern states, creating false documentation of slave status, and selling them to plantations farther south. This highly illegal operation apparently centered around the cellar beneath the East Wing, where captives were held before transport. More disturbingly, the diary suggested that Amelia Prescott was not merely aware of this operation, but had at one point been its victim. Entries implied that Amelia had been born free in Pennsylvania, educated as a teacher, and had been abducted during a trip to Maryland. Frederick had apparently selected her, created a false history and identity for her, and forced her into marriage. The diary claimed this was the source of Eleanor's perpetual melancholy and her strange, distant relationship with her husband. According to the diary, Amelia discovered the truth when she found letters her mother had attempted to send north years earlier, hidden in a compartment of Eleanor's sewing box. Confronting her father led to threats against her life, prompting Amelia to plan her escape, not just for herself, but to expose the operation and free those still trapped in the system her father had created. The professor who received these documents prepared a paper on his findings, but it was never published. University records indicate he left his position suddenly in early 1869, citing personal matters requiring immediate attention elsewhere. The Prescott documents were filed in the college archives and remained largely forgotten until a cataloging project in 1954 brought them to light again. Attempts to verify the diary's claims produced mixed results. Census records confirmed the existence of an Eleanor Jenkins, matching Amelia Prescott's age and description, who had indeed worked as a teacher in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and disappeared during a trip to Baltimore in 1823. Frederick Prescott's business ledgers showed regular payments to H for special acquisitions, possibly Arthur Hamilton acting as an intermediary for human trafficking. Most compelling was the discovery in 1865 of a hidden cemetery on the former Willow Creek property, unmarked graves of at least 12 individuals whose remains showed no relation to the known slave burials on the plantation. Forensic techniques of the era could determine little beyond the fact that several appeared to have died from violence rather than disease or natural causes. The final piece of the Prescott mystery emerged in 1957 when a collection of letters was donated to the Georgia Historical Society by the descendants of a Philadelphia abolitionist. Among them was correspondence from a woman signing herself A.P., who provided detailed information about slave traders and kidnappers operating throughout the South in the 1840s. One letter, dated October 1848, contained this passage: I write to you from the shadows of my former life, a ghost haunting those who believed they could bury truth alongside their victims. My father's house has fallen, my mother's suffering is ended. But the work continues, for there are others like him, men whose respectability masks monstrous appetites. They believe themselves untouchable. They are wrong. The true fate of Amelia Prescott remains unknown. No definitive record of her life after leaving Willow Creek has ever been confirmed. Some evidence suggests she may have worked with the Underground Railroad, using her intimate knowledge of Southern society to guide escaped slaves to freedom. Other accounts place her in Philadelphia, Boston, or even London, living under an assumed name. What is certain is that the Prescott name faded from Augusta society. Thomas never returned to Georgia after settling his father's estate. Catherine Prescott Reynolds moved with her husband to Europe in 1850. The once prominent family disappeared from social registers and business directories, leaving behind only whispers of scandal and the persistent legends surrounding Willow Creek plantation. Today, the land where the Prescott home once stood remains undeveloped, a peaceful meadow bordered by pine forests, giving no indication of the dark history beneath its surface. Occasionally, local residents report seeing a solitary woman walking the perimeter at dusk, dressed in clothes from another era. Others dismiss such sightings as mere folklore, the inevitable ghost stories that attach themselves to places with troubled pasts. Perhaps the truth of Amelia Prescott's defiance lies somewhere between documented history and legend. A young woman who discovered the monstrous secret at the heart of her family's prosperity and chose to destroy that family rather than remain complicit in its crimes. In doing so, she defied not just her father's authority, but an entire social order built on carefully maintained lies and the ownership of human beings. In the words attributed to Amelia herself in that final letter to Philadelphia, "Some secrets cannot remain buried, no matter how deeply you dig the grave. Some truths rise to the surface like bodies in floodwater. The South will reckon with its sins, whether it wishes to or not." The Prescott case files were archived and largely forgotten until 1965, when they were microfilmed as part of a statewide historical preservation project. During the process, several key documents, including Amelia's alleged diary, were reported missing from their folders. They have never been recovered. And so the story of Amelia Prescott remains incomplete, fragments of evidence pointing toward a truth too uncomfortable for her contemporaries to fully acknowledge. A daughter who discovered the monster behind her father's respectable mask. A young woman who chose justice over family loyalty. A name that continues to echo through Augusta's history, though few now remember why. For in the carefully maintained narratives of the antebellum South, certain stories were never meant to be told. Certain defiances could not be acknowledged, and certain rules, once broken, revealed the rotting foundation beneath the grand white columns of Southern society. The wind still whispers through the meadow where Willow Creek plantation once stood. Listen carefully, and you might hear what sounds like a woman's voice, still telling her story to anyone willing to hear the truth. In 1960, a graduate student at Emory University uncovered additional documents related to the Prescott case while researching the illegal domestic slave trade. These papers, found in the personal collection of a former Augusta judge, included testimonies that had never been entered into official records, statements from several freed people who had allegedly been held captive at Willow Creek before being sold farther south. One account, attributed to a woman named Sarah Johnson, described being approached in Philadelphia by a well-dressed white man who offered teaching positions in a new school for colored children in Maryland. Sarah and 3 other educated black women accepted the offer, only to be drugged during the journey and wake up chained in a cellar. "The man they called Master Prescott would come to inspect us," her statement read. He would make us recite our fictional histories until we could tell them without hesitation, beating those who faltered. He was creating new pasts for us, erasing who we had been. Sarah's testimony included a significant detail. There was a young white woman who would sometimes bring extra food or medicine when the master was away. She never spoke, but once she left a scrap of paper with a single word: soon. The night before I was to be transported, I found my chains unlocked. A different white woman led me and 2 others through the woods to a wagon hidden near the river. She called herself the daughter returning what was stolen. This account aligned with fragments found in Amelia's diary, suggesting she had not acted alone. References to mother's assistance despite her fear implied that Amelia Prescott, herself allegedly a victim of Frederick's scheme, had helped her daughter undermine the operation from within, perhaps explaining Frederick's growing paranoia in the months before his death. In 1962, renovation of an old property in Philadelphia uncovered a hidden compartment containing documents from the Underground Railroad. Among them was a coded ledger with entries dating from 1846 to 1854, tracking the movement of escaped slaves northward. The code was eventually deciphered by historians, revealing that an operative identified only as Augusta's daughter had helped guide at least 34 individuals to freedom during this period. Several entries specifically noted these were reclamation cases, free black people who had been kidnapped and sold into slavery, then rescued and returned north. The geographic pattern of these rescues corresponded to business connections of Frederick Prescott and his associates, suggesting someone with intimate knowledge of their operations was systematically dismantling their network. The Philadelphia documents also included a letter dated December 10, 1846, the same period when Amelia Prescott received correspondence that reportedly caused her significant distress. The letter, addressed simply to Mother, read in part, "What he built through deception, we shall unbuild through truth. Each soul returned to freedom weakens the foundation of his house. I have found others willing to help our cause. You need only hold fast a while longer. When enough has been undone, I will come for you." The letter was signed with a simple A, followed by a small sketch of a willow tree, an inversion of the Prescott plantation symbol, with the branches pointing downward like roots. Further evidence of Amelia's continued activities emerged in 1868 when Arthur Hamilton, Frederick Prescott's former business partner, drafted his will. Hamilton, who had severed ties with Prescott shortly before his death, included an unusual bequest. 20% of his estate was to go to the Restoration Fund, managed by She Who Opened My Eyes to Abomination. Hamilton's personal journal, unsealed after his death, revealed his horror upon learning the true nature of Prescott's business ventures and his subsequent decision to provide financial support to Amelia's rescue efforts. "I cannot undo my years of unwitting complicity," Hamilton wrote in October 1847, "but I can ensure that the daughter's righteousness outweighs the father's sin. Money that once purchased human misery will now purchase human freedom." Perhaps the most tantalizing clue to Amelia's fate came from Thomas Prescott's private papers, discovered during the renovation of his Boston home in 1959. Thomas, who had effectively exiled himself from Southern society after learning the truth about his father, maintained sporadic contact with his sister through carefully disguised correspondence. Their letters, written in a simple substitution cipher, revealed that Thomas provided legal assistance to Amelia's network, creating documentation for freed people and using his connections to shield her activities from authorities. In his last known reference to his sister, dated 1853, Thomas wrote, "A has decided the Philadelphia house is no longer secure. She speaks of moving the operation farther west, where territorial law is still being established. I have advised against such a dangerous undertaking at her age, but she dismisses my concern. The work is not complete, she writes, and I have daughters of my own now who must learn what freedom truly costs. This reference to daughters is particularly intriguing to historians, as no record exists of Amelia Prescott ever marrying or having children. Some scholars suggest she may have adopted or informally taken in young women rescued from situations similar to her mother's, creating a new kind of family bound by shared purpose rather than blood. One such daughter may have been Rebecca Wilson, whose memoir, From Bondage to Freedom, A Woman's Journey, was published anonymously in 1872. Wilson described being rescued from illegal enslavement by a grey-eyed Southern lady who spoke with the accent of privilege but acted with the courage of conviction. Wilson traveled with this unnamed benefactor for several years, participating in rescue operations throughout the South and eventually establishing a school for freed people in Kansas Territory. Wilson's description of her mentor's methods reveals the extent to which Amelia may have used her understanding of Southern society as a weapon against it. She moved through the finest houses as if born to them, which indeed she was. She wore the mask of Southern womanhood perfectly, allowing men to underestimate her intelligence while she catalogued their vulnerabilities. She knew their world from the inside, its customs, its blind spots, its hypocrisies. And she exploited everyone to free those unjustly held. The trail of Amelia Prescott grows cold after 1857. Some evidence suggests she may have traveled to England, where abolitionist circles welcomed American allies with resources and connections. A woman matching her description attended several anti-slavery society meetings in London, introducing herself as a repentant daughter of the American South, making amends for inherited sin. Other accounts place her in Canada, working with communities established by formerly enslaved people who had escaped via the Underground Railroad. A letter from a Toronto-based abolitionist referenced a Miss A, formerly of Georgia, who established a school and legal aid society for refugees from American slavery. The most intriguing possibility, supported by land records and local folklore, is that Amelia eventually returned to Georgia, not to Augusta, where the Prescott name remained tainted by whispers of scandal, but to Savannah. Property deeds from 1860 show a purchase made by A.P. Wilson, described as a widow of mature years, for a modest house near the city's growing community of free black residents. Local tax records indicate this A.P. Wilson operated a small seamstress shop that employed several women. Church records show she made regular donations to educational initiatives for freed people. Her neighbors described her as reserved but kind, a woman who kept largely to herself but never hesitated to offer assistance to those in need. When she died in 1871, at approximately 47 years of age, her simple will divided her modest estate among her employees and requested burial in an unmarked grave. The only personal item specifically mentioned was my mother's silver locket to be returned to the earth with me. A locket matching this description had been among the items found in Amelia Prescott's possession after her death. A small silver oval containing not a family portrait as would be customary, but a pressed flower identified by botanists as Dicentra cucullaria, commonly known as Dutchman's breeches, a woodland plant native to Pennsylvania. The most compelling evidence linking A.P. Wilson to Amelia Prescott came from an unexpected source, Catherine Prescott Reynolds, Amelia's sister, who had maintained her distance from the family scandal by relocating to Europe. In 1873, 2 years after Wilson's death, Catherine returned briefly to Georgia. County records show she visited the Savannah courthouse, where she examined property records related to Wilson's estate. Before returning to her home in Paris, Catherine commissioned a small memorial stone in the Savannah Public Cemetery, where Wilson was buried. The stone bore no name, only an inscription. She chose truth over comfort, justice over loyalty, and in doing so, honored the highest law. Below these words was a small engraving of a willow tree, its branches pointing downward like roots reaching into the earth. The final chapter of the Prescott saga played out in 1965, when construction workers preparing to build a shopping center near the former Willow Creek plantation site uncovered a sealed brick chamber beneath what had been the east wing of the main house. Inside, preserved by the unusual construction that had protected it from moisture and decay, was a collection of documents, ship manifests, sale records, and ledgers detailing the names and supposed values of dozens of individuals. More disturbing were the personal items: locks of hair tied with ribbon, a child's wooden doll, a handwritten Bible with family births and deaths recorded inside the cover, tangible evidence of lives interrupted, identities stolen, and families separated by Frederick Prescott's operation. Most significant was a leather-bound volume, its pages filled with neat, feminine handwriting. This journal, signed Eleanor Jenkins Prescott, detailed her abduction from Pennsylvania in 1823, her forced marriage to Frederick, and her years of captivity disguised as privilege. The journal's final entry, dated May 1st, 1847, the day before her death, read simply, "Amelia promises she will undo what he has done. It is too late for me, but perhaps not for others. I go to my grave knowing my daughter carries forward what I was too afraid to attempt. May God forgive my silence and bless her courage." Historians now generally accept that Eleanor Prescott did not die of natural causes, as her death certificate claimed. The journal strongly implies she had begun actively assisting Amelia's efforts to undermine Frederick's operations, and that he had discovered their complicity. Whether Eleanor took her own life to escape his retribution or was murdered to silence her remains a matter of speculation. What is clear is that Amelia Prescott's defiance extended far beyond a single act of rebellion against her father. The evidence suggests she dedicated her life to systematically dismantling not just Frederick Prescott's criminal enterprise, but the broader system it represented, a society that allowed monstrous actions to hide behind respectability and tradition. In doing so, she defied every rule that governed the world of her birth, the submission expected of daughters, the loyalty demanded of family members, the willful blindness required of Southern women, to the cruelties that purchased their comfort. She chose instead to see clearly, to speak truthfully, and to act justly, choices that made her an exile from her class and culture. The Augusta Chronicle's 1846 description of Amelia as possessed of a quick mind and gentle demeanor revealed nothing of the moral courage that would define her life. No society column could have predicted that this vision of Southern grace would become what one abolitionist later described as a righteous fury in lace gloves, dismantling the master's house with tools she found within it. The last known reference to Amelia Prescott's legacy comes from a speech given at Fisk University in 1969 by Dr. Martha Johnson, a historian and descendant of Sarah Johnson, one of the women allegedly rescued from Willow Creek. Addressing a conference on women in the abolitionist movement, Dr. Johnson said, "History remembers the names of great men who spoke against slavery from pulpits and podiums. But we must also remember those who worked in shadows and silence, those who recognized evil not as an abstraction to be debated, but as a present reality to be confronted." Amelia Prescott saw the monster at her own table, wearing her father's face. Rather than turning away, she looked deeper. Rather than accepting, she acted. And in doing so, she reminds us that true courage often begins with the simple, terrible act of seeing what others refuse to see. Today, the land where Willow Creek Plantation once stood has been designated a historical site, though not for the grandeur of its architecture or the prominence of its owners. Instead, It stands as a memorial to those who were held there against their will, both the enslaved people who labored in its fields and the free people who were temporarily imprisoned in its cellar before being sold into bondage farther south. Archaeological work continues at the site, gradually revealing the physical evidence of what the Prescott family papers only hinted at: a systematic operation of human trafficking hidden beneath the veneer of southern gentility, and the equally systematic resistance mounted by a daughter who refused to inherit her father's sins. Visitors to the site often report a strange sensation when walking near the foundation stones that once supported the east wing, a feeling of being watched, evaluated, remembered. Some describe hearing what sounds like pages turning in an empty room, or catching a glimpse of a woman in outdated dress, standing at a distance, observing. Perhaps these are merely the projections of imaginations primed by a disturbing history. Or perhaps, as local folklore suggests, Amelia Prescott still keeps watch over the place where she first discovered the truth, ensuring that what was once hidden in darkness remains exposed to light. For in defying the rules that governed her world, Amelia Prescott did more than reject her father's authority or escape her prescribed role. She rewrote the narrative of what a Southern daughter could be, not just an ornament to family prestige or a transmitter of wealth and status through advantageous marriage, but a moral agent capable of recognizing injustice and choosing to stand against it, even at tremendous personal cost. In the complex moral accounting of American history, such choices remind us that complicity was never the only option, that even within systems designed to normalize oppression, individual conscience could still awaken, individual courage could still assert itself, and a single determined woman could defy every rule of her society in pursuit of a higher law. The mystery of Amelia Prescott may never be fully resolved. The fragments of her story, scattered across archives, memoirs, and folklore, leave gaps that can only be filled by informed speculation. But perhaps this incompleteness is fitting for a woman who lived much of her life in deliberate obscurity, who understood the power of secrets, and who learned to move between worlds without leaving traces. What remains undisputed is the impact of her defiance, the lives changed by her intervention, the network she helped build, and the example she set for those who would come after her. In choosing truth over comfort and justice over loyalty, Amelia Prescott embodied a form of courage that transcended her time and place, speaking across generations to all who face the difficult choice between acceptance of wrong and the costly path of resistance. As Rebecca Wilson wrote in her memoir, she taught me that freedom is not merely the absence of chains, but the presence of moral courage. To be truly free is to recognize injustice and refuse to make peace with it, even when that injustice benefits you, even when opposing it costs you everything you once valued. This is the freedom she claimed for herself, and the freedom she fought to give others. It is a lesson I carry forward, a torch passed from her hands to mine, illuminating the darkness she once navigated with such remarkable grace. In the end, perhaps this is Amelia Prescott's most enduring legacy. Not just the lives she helped save or the system she helped undermine, but the moral example she provided. A reminder that even in the most oppressive circumstances, the human capacity for ethical awakening remains possible. That seeing clearly is the first act of courage. That defiance of unjust rules is not merely rebellion, but the necessary foundation of a more just world. The meadow where Willow Creek once stood is peaceful now. Wildflowers bloom where the grand house's columns once cast their shadows. Nature has reclaimed what human cruelty once dominated, but beneath the gentle surface lies a history of both terrible wrongs and remarkable courage. A history embodied in the story of one planter's daughter whose secret defied every rule of the South.